Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Thomas was never a suspicious man. He always believed that trust was the foundation of any lasting relationship, and during 9 years of marriage with Rachel, he never lacked reasons to feel secure. They lived in Newark, in a quiet neighborhood where almost everyone knew each other by name. He worked as a maintenance technician for an air conditioning company and spent much of the day away from home. Rachel, on the other hand, was an assistant at a dental clinic and worked part-time, which gave her more time to take care of the house and their son, Lucas, who was 7 years old. The routine was stable, without big emotions, but also without conflicts. At least, that's what Thomas believed. In the last 2 months, however, something started to change. Rachel seemed more vain than usual. She began dressing more carefully for simple daily tasks like picking up Lucas from school or going to the store. Up to that point, Thomas didn't see anything wrong. In fact, he thought it was positive that she was taking better care of herself. But what really caught his attention was her increasingly insistent behavior around Aiden, Lucas's classmate. Rachel talked about the boy with unusual frequency, mentioning how polite he was, how organized his house was, how nice his parents seemed. The first time she offered to pick Lucas up from the boy's house, Thomas found it normal. But this became a habit. Whenever Lucas was at Aiden's house, especially on Saturdays, Rachel made a point of going to get him. Even when Aiden's parents offered to bring him, or when Thomas showed he was available, she refused. She would say things like, "I was already going that way anyway," or, "It's good to stop by the store afterwards." The forced naturalness of these justifications started to bother him. And the strangest thing was the way she came back from those times, lighter, more cheerful, with an expression of someone who had experienced something pleasant. It wasn't common for someone to be so upbeat after a simple round trip. Thomas tried to rationalize. Maybe he was just being paranoid. But something inside him said it wasn't just that. One specific Saturday reinforced this feeling. Rachel got ready with unusual advance planning, put on perfume, took extra time fixing her hair, and, when asked, responded with a distracted smile that, "It was just so I wouldn't look tired." Thomas looked at her in silence. That woman in front of him was the same one he shared a bed, a house, a life with. But at that moment, she seemed to be playing a role. And for the first time, he felt like he was being deceived. Not by words, but by actions. Something was off, and he knew that sooner or later, he would have to face the truth. Thomas spent the following days observing more carefully. He wasn't looking for obvious signs, but small details started standing out. Rachel left her phone on silent more often, turned the screen down when placing it on the table, and lately seemed disconnected from family conversations. During dinner, she answered with monosyllables, and when Lucas talked about his time at Aiden's house, she seemed more interested in confirming schedules and details than in hearing the stories from her own son. Once, the boy mentioned that Aiden's father worked from home, something Thomas had never heard before. He casually questioned Rachel, but she only murmured that she wasn't sure and changed the subject right after. One ordinary Thursday night, Thomas noticed that Rachel took longer than usual to come home from the clinic. When she arrived, she had bags in her hands, saying she had stopped to buy some things. But the bags were practically empty. Only 2 basic items, nothing that justified the extra time. She didn't seem nervous, just disconnected. It was as if she was living 2 different scripts at the same time, one pretending to continue there with him and another happening far away, where he wasn't invited. Thomas didn't comment on anything, but as the days passed, the unease took up more and more space inside him. There was still no concrete evidence, nothing that could be pointed to as definitive proof, but the pattern of small actions spoke for itself. The rush in movements, vague excuses, mismatched schedules, and visible discomfort when he asked simple questions. All of it formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. The feeling was that Rachel was emotionally somewhere else, with someone who wasn't him. On the next Saturday, Rachel repeated the same pattern. She said she would pick up Lucas around 4 in the afternoon and then pass by the store. But this time, Thomas decided to prepare. He told Rachel he was going to a neighbor's house to get some tools and would be back later, then took the car keys and parked a block away, 20 minutes before she left. He stayed calm on the outside, but inside he felt a growing tension, as if something important was about to reveal itself. And deep down, he knew that if he was wrong, he preferred to find out once and for all rather than continue being eaten away by doubt. At 3:30 p.m., he saw Rachel leave the house, dressed too nicely for a simple motherly task. She got into the car and started driving. Thomas turned on the engine, kept a safe distance, and began following. He was ready to face whatever came next. Rachel drove along the main avenue with the calm of someone who had no hurry. Thomas kept the car always at a safe distance, paying attention to her movements and ready for any change in route. For the first few minutes, she seemed to be heading toward the area where Aidan lived. But instead of turning right onto the street that directly accessed the neighborhood, she turned left and started circling through streets he didn't recognize. His mental GPS knew that path didn't make sense for her declared destination. This wasn't just a traffic detour, it was a detour of intent. And it was there that he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was following something much bigger than he suspected. After a few minutes of winding through residential streets, Rachel parked in front of a house with a low gate and a plain facade, in a modest neighborhood with no apparent movement. A silver car was already in the garage, and from the structure of the house, it was clear that it wasn't the residence of a family with young children. Thomas parked further ahead, in a strategic position. He watched as she got out of the car, adjusted her hair in the reflection of the window, and walked toward the gate. She rang the bell twice. A man appeared. Tall, athletic body, dark t-shirt. He smiled discreetly, opened the gate, and let her in without hesitation. Rachel entered. The front door closed behind her. Time there seemed not to function as normal. Thomas remained motionless, hands firm on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the house and mind spinning silently. There was no more doubt. It wasn't Aidan's house. And the man who opened the door, the one now sharing Rachel's time with him, wasn't anyone's dad. The kid was just an excuse, a smokescreen, a convenient pretext that masked a carefully planned meeting. He felt his heart racing, but his body remained steady. He knew he needed to watch until the end, without rushing. The clock moved slowly. 20 minutes. Half an hour. 40 minutes. Every second fed the silent indignation taking over him. He tried to imagine what was happening on the other side of those walls, but he didn't need many details to understand. The context already spoke loudly. Rachel wasn't there by accident, nor on impulse. That scenario indicated routine, something rehearsed, frequent. A ritual. And what hurt Thomas more than the physical act of betrayal itself was the coldness with which it was done. The planning. The consistency. The use of her own child as an emotional shield. About 50 minutes later, Rachel left the house. Her hair was loosely disheveled, an empty expression on her face. She didn't look guilty, but neither did she look happy. It was as if that moment had been just another task completed. She got into the car and left with normalcy, as if nothing wrong had just happened. Thomas waited until she disappeared at the end of the street and then turned on the car to go back. He drove aimlessly for a few minutes, finally stopping at a gas station, where he sat inside the vehicle with the engine off, trying to regain control of his breathing. The silence inside was deafening. Everything he had avoided thinking about in the past weeks was now presented before him with the brutality of facts. It was no longer a suspicion, nor an unease based on intuition. It was real. And it was happening right before his eyes. Rachel was cheating. Lying. Deceiving with method and convenience, like someone who knows exactly how far they can go without raising suspicions. But she miscalculated the amount of confidence. She underestimated the attention of a man who, until a little while ago, never imagined he would need to spy on his own wife. Back home, Thomas still didn't know how to confront her. But he had no doubts about what to do. He didn't need scandals, public exposures, or fragile justifications. What he wanted was to look into her eyes with the clarity of someone who knows everything. Make her feel, even if just for a minute, the weight of knowing she had been caught. And from that moment on, nothing would be the same again. Rachel arrived home exactly at 6:30 in the evening. As soon as the door opened, Lucas ran excitedly and jumped into his father's arms, who had been sitting there for over an hour in complete silence. Thomas didn't ask anything. It wasn't necessary anymore. He had seen enough. Rachel came in smiling, with the same calm look she had on every other Saturday. She held 2 small bags and went straight to the kitchen, where she placed them on the counter. Without noticing the mood, she casually commented that the market was crowded and that the conversation at Aidan's mom's house was nice and she didn't realize how late it had gotten, hence the delay. She started putting the items away as if everything was as it always was. But for Thomas, that feeling of normality had long since ceased to exist. Thomas stood up from the couch without saying a word. He walked slowly to the counter and placed his phone on the table, with the screen facing up. 3 clear images taken with precision, her car parked in front of the house, the door opening with an unknown man, and Rachel entering, smiling, without haste. The visual impact was immediate. She froze. Her hands stopped moving, her smile died on her face, her eyes searched for an escape that didn't exist. There was no room for denials. Nor for excuses. Without changing his tone of voice, Thomas said she had until 10 o'clock that night to leave the house. There would be no conversation, no requests for explanations. Trust had been destroyed, and with it, the right to remain under the same roof. The betrayal wasn't just conjugal. It was moral, emotional, familial. She had used her own child as an excuse to meet another man. She had lied with method, with routine, with coldness. And now, she would pay the price for it. Rachel tried to open her mouth, but Thomas had already turned his back. He climbed the stairs with determined steps, opened her closet, and started putting clothes into 2 medium-sized suitcases. He didn't sort them carefully. There was no more affection, only urgency. With each piece folded, he felt like he was removing a falsified memory from his own history. Meanwhile, downstairs, Rachel remained motionless, in absolute silence, without strength to react. The truth had already won. When he came down, he handed the suitcases to the hallway in the living room. He said that if she wanted to take more things, she had to do it right then. Any remaining items would be put in boxes and sent later. Rachel, with nowhere else to hide, began quietly packing her belongings. She avoided looking at him. Avoided any word that could worsen what was already decided. Thomas remained firm, silent, but watching everything. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. She had made choices, and now she had to deal with the consequences. That was simply it. Lucas was already asleep, and Thomas made sure to keep everything away from the child's eyes. He wouldn't allow the innocence of his son to be tainted by a scene no child should witness. When the clock marked 9:50, Rachel crossed the front door with the suitcases in her hands. She didn't say goodbye. Didn't promise changes. Just left. And perhaps, for the first time, she understood the weight of what she had done. Because there, in that absolute silence between the two of them, there was no more room for forgiveness. Thomas stood still in front of the door for a few minutes after she left. There was no shouting, no drama. Just the sound of the key turning in the lock, sealing the end of a cycle he had never imagined he would have to close. He walked to the kitchen, turned off the lights, and slowly climbed the stairs. As he passed by Lucas's room, he opened the door carefully. The boy was sleeping deeply, unaware of everything. Thomas stayed there for a few seconds, watching. He knew that from now on, he would have to be even stronger. Not just for himself, but for that boy who would now depend entirely on the strength of his father. The night was long. The room felt bigger, colder. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of freedom. The lie had gone. The doubt, too. Only the truth remained. And even though it hurt, it was clean. Firm. Finally, the beginning of a new path. The morning after was quiet. Rachel's absence was felt in the small habits, in the sounds that no longer repeated themselves. There were no footsteps in the kitchen, no smell of fresh coffee coming from the coffee maker. Only the creaking of the stairs and the sound of Lucas waking up with his usual childlike energy. Thomas went down calmly, prepared the boy's coffee, and sat with him at the table, as he did every Sunday. He didn't mention her absence. Just said that she would have to stay away for a few days and that he would take care of everything. Lucas accepted the explanation with the simplicity of someone who still sees the world with simplicity. And that was exactly what Thomas wanted to protect at that moment, the simplicity of someone who doesn't yet understand the weight of adult choices. While his son watched cartoons in the living room, Thomas went to the office and started organizing documents. He separated joint bills, pulled out bank statements, located contracts in his name. He had always been organized, but now he needed to be meticulous. The separation had to happen in a practical, objective, final way. He had already decided to file for divorce that very week. He wouldn't open any doors for reconciliation, nor would he allow the story to take another turn. Rachel had left on her own will. He had only shown her the door. Over the next few days, the news of the separation began to spread among the closest ones. No details were shared. Only the information that Rachel had left the house and that the marriage had come to an end. Thomas noticed, from the reactions, that some friends already suspected something. Others were surprised, but didn't question. He preferred it that way. He didn't want pity, nor scandal. He just wanted to move forward with the clarity of someone who acted with justice and clarity. On Thursday, Rachel showed up at her sister's house to talk to a family lawyer. She wanted to know if there was any way to contest the separation. She said she still loved Thomas, that she didn't want to lose the marriage, that she regretted it. The lawyer, after listening patiently, asked if she had been unfaithful. Rachel hesitated, then nodded slightly. The answer was direct, that complicated everything. If Thomas was set on it, she would have few chances to legally reverse the situation. Especially with documented proof of the infidelity. Rachel then tried an emotional approach. She sent a long message to Thomas on Friday night. Said she couldn't sleep, that she felt lost, that her sister's house didn't feel like home. Repeated that the other man meant nothing, that it was a momentary mistake, an insignificant escape. Thomas read everything in silence. But didn't respond. There was no room for regrets anymore. What she destroyed was much greater than a marital bond. She broke the emotional foundation of the whole family. The next morning, Thomas logged into the bank and transferred half the amount from the joint account to a new account in his name and cancelled additional cards. He sent a formal message to Rachel with the receipts and the list of the next legal steps. He was direct, she would have the rights the law determined, but beyond that, there would be no negotiation. The custody of Lucas, he made clear, would be his. The child shouldn't be involved in that emotional mess. On Saturday night, after putting Lucas to sleep, Thomas sat alone in the living room, watching the walls of the house that now seemed quieter, but also more honest. The empty space left by Rachel was real, but what filled that space was a new feeling, not of pain, but of reconstruction. He knew that from now on, he would have to rebuild his entire life. But unlike what he had imagined before, he didn't feel broken. He felt clean. Because, in the end, the truth, even when it hurts, always brings back something essential, peace. Sunday morning was cloudy, and for the first time in weeks, Thomas woke up without the feeling of weight in his chest. There was still some resentment, of course, but it seemed more controlled, less corrosive. The routine with Lucas was settled. They woke up together, made breakfast, organized school supplies, watched movies at night. The child, although he felt the absence of his mother, hadn't asked difficult questions yet. And Thomas knew the time for them would come. So he prepared himself in silence for the day he would have to explain, with simple words, that some choices hurt not only the person who makes them but also the one who is left behind. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't handle the silence well. The total distance left her in a constant state of alert. In the first weeks, she tried emotional approaches. Then, veiled threats about custody, visits, even indirect comments about public reconciliation. But nothing worked. Thomas remained firm. He didn't block her, but also didn't reply. He didn't create a scandal, but acted with precision. Each of her moves was monitored, each action recorded, as if it were necessary to build a legal wall around the protection of his son. The conciliation hearing was scheduled for the following month. Thomas attended accompanied by a lawyer and with all the documentation organized, photos, schedules, school records, bank statements. Rachel arrived with a tired look, but tried to maintain her composure. In front of the mediator, she spoke about preserving the family bond, saying she didn't want Lucas to grow up with divorced parents. Thomas didn't counter. He only delivered the evidence. The silence that settled in that room after the documents were handed over was more eloquent than any speech. The attempt at agreement was brief. It was defined that Rachel would have the right to bi-weekly visits initially supervised, with possible future flexibility, provided she maintained emotional stability and cooperation with the process. The primary custody would be Thomas's. The judge accepted all the conditions. The separation, for legal purposes, was already in progress. Only the final approval remained. But for Thomas, the marriage had ended the exact moment he saw Rachel entering that house with another man. The rest was just procedure. In the following months, Rachel oscillated between attempts at connection and long periods of silence. She tried to schedule meetings with Lucas, but the visits were always tense. The child, who loved his mother, could feel something had changed. It was as if that presence no longer fit the way it used to. Rachel tried hard, but she seemed always distant, disconnected, like someone trying to recover what she could no longer touch. Thomas, on the other hand, rebuilt the house bit by bit. He moved the furniture, repainted the room, removed the old photos from the walls. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. He needed to look around and see a new scenario, free of lies hidden behind smiles. He started going out more frequently, reconnecting with old contacts, returning to the gym. He wasn't looking for someone else. He just wanted to rediscover his own identity, the one that had been suffocated for years within a marriage that, now he realized, was already imbalanced long before the infidelity happened. One night, near the end of the legal process, Rachel called. Not to argue, nor to negotiate. She called to say she now understood how he felt. She said she would never forget the way he reacted with firmness, but without aggression. With clarity, but without humiliation. She said she had been cowardly. She thought she could hide, that she would never be discovered. And that she only realized the scale of her mistake when she saw the door closing with her on the outside. Thomas listened. In silence. And at the end, he only replied that he hoped she could find her own value again. Because whoever lies to the one they love, before deceiving the other, is already lost to themselves. The divorce papers arrived 2 days later. Thomas read each line carefully, signed them calmly, and left them in an envelope ready to be returned. When he left to put them in the mailbox, he felt the cold morning wind hit his face with the same sense of freedom he had been experiencing for the past few months. He hadn't won, nor lost. He had simply overcome. That night, as he was putting Lucas to bed, the child asked if his mother would come back home. Thomas took a deep breath. He said that sometimes, when people hurt each other, the best they can do is take care of themselves in separate places. Lucas seemed to understand. He slowly closed his eyes and adjusted himself under the blanket. Thomas stayed by his side for a few more minutes, looking at that peaceful face, knowing that from now on, his mission was to keep that peace intact. Rachel's betrayal had hurt him. But it didn't destroy him. Because, in the end, she wasn't able to take from him what he valued most, his dignity. And it was with that dignity that he would move forward, whole, clean, and fearless of starting over. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.